When I say I will take control, the very first step is not about grabbing power or changing everything around you in some grand display of force. It's about something far more fundamental, something uncomfortable but also deeply liberating. It's about responsibility. That's the ground floor of control. Because if you refuse to take responsibility for your life, then by definition, you handed over control to everything else, circumstances, other people, random chance. And once you do that, you become a passenger, not the driver. And we live in a culture that has made it far too easy to point a finger outward. People will say, well, I can't succeed because my boss is unfair, or I can't move forward because I wasn't given the same opportunities as others, or life has dealt me a bad hand, and that's why I can't change. And maybe in some cases there's truth in those statements. Life is undeniably unfair, inequality exists, hardship is real, but here's the brutal truth. If you build your identity around those grievances, if you make your sense of self dependent on what happened to you, rather than how you choose to respond, then you've sentenced yourself to permanent victimhood. You've chained yourself to circumstances you cannot control, and in doing so, you've abandoned the one thing you can control: your response, your effort, your responsibility. Responsibility is not about self-blame. That distinction is crucial. I'm not saying you should walk around accusing yourself of everything that's wrong. That's self-destruction, not responsibility. Responsibility is different. It's the courageous act of saying, yes, life is difficult. Yes, people have failed me. Yes, I've made mistakes, but regardless of all that, I will take ownership of what I do next. I will carry the weight of my own existence. That shift is not trivial. It transforms your psychology from helplessness to agency. You move from being someone to whom life happens to being someone who actively shapes life. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, wrote about this in Man's Search for Meaning. He observed that even in the most horrific conditions imaginable, where almost everything was stripped from a human being, their freedom, their dignity, their very survival, there was still one final freedom no one could take away: the freedom to choose one's attitude, to decide how to respond. That insight is the essence of even in the darkest circumstances, there is a space between what happens to you and how you respond. In that space lives your power. That is where you find control. And let's be clear, responsibility is heavy. It is supposed to be heavy. People think freedom means being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want. But that's not freedom, that's chaos. True freedom emerges when you voluntarily accept the weight of responsibility, because responsibility gives your actions meaning. Imagine you have no obligations, nothing you need to take care of, no one who depends on you. That may sound appealing in the short term, but in reality, it leads to emptiness, not fulfillment. You only find depth, purpose, and significance in life when you say, I will carry the load. I will act as if what I do matters, because it does. When you refuse responsibility, you drift into bitterness. You begin to envy others, resent their success, blame them for your failures. That mindset poisons you and it pushes you further from control. But when you accept responsibility, even for things that may not be directly your fault, you begin to reclaim control. You stop saying, why did this happen to me? And you start saying, what can I do about it now? That small shift is the seed of transformation. Think about it in the simplest terms. If your life is a book and you refuse responsibility, then someone else is writing your chapters. They decide your storyline, but if you take responsibility, suddenly the pen is back in your hand. The plot may be messy, the characters may be difficult, and the ending is still uncertain, but at least you are the author, not a side character drifting through someone else's narrative. And this is where it gets difficult because responsibility demands honesty. You have to look at yourself clearly. You have to admit the role you play in your own suffering. Maybe you're not disciplined with your time. Maybe you've let anger or fear dictate your choices. Maybe you've been avoiding challenges you know you need to face. It's hard to confront these truths because they shatter the comforting illusion that the problem is always out there, the world beyond your control. But without that confrontation, without that honest reckoning, you can never take control of your life because you're too busy running from the truth of yourself. So what does it mean practically to own responsibility? Right? It means that when you fail, you don't point outwards first. You look that when life is unfair, you refuse to allow that unfairness to define your limits. It means that when people wrong you, still choose to move forward rather than wallow in resentment. Responsibility is not about controlling everything. It's about controlling what you can and refusing to surrender that control to excuses or bitterness. If you want to take control of your life, start here. Start with responsibility. Own your choices, own your habits, own your direction. Stop waiting for someone to save you. Stop hoping for luck to intervene. Stop expecting the world to hand you what you have not earned. Responsibility is the foundation upon which discipline and action can be built. Without it, the other key points collapse into nothing. With it, you become unstoppable because you realize that no matter what the world throws at you, you still have the power to respond with strength, with courage, and with purpose. And here's the truth that should both inspire you and frighten you. Responsibility is not optional. If you refuse it, you don't escape the burden. You simply transfer it to others, and your life becomes dictated by their choices, not yours. If you accept it, you carry a heavy load, yes, but you also gain strength, dignity, and direction. So the question is simple. Do you want to live as a victim of circumstance or as the author of your own destiny? Responsibility makes, because in the end, to take control of your life, you must first take control of yourself. If responsibility is the foundation of control, then discipline is the structure you build on top of it. Responsibility tells you this is your life and it's up to you to carry it. But discipline answers the next question: how exactly are you going to carry it? Without discipline, responsibility becomes a vague sentiment. You might accept the idea that your life is yours to own, but unless you can organize yourself, restrain yourself, and direct yourself, that ownership never translates into meaningful change. So discipline is, in essence, the art of ordering chaos. Your life, left unmanaged, is chaotic by nature. The human mind drifts toward comfort, distraction, and avoidance. Left to its impulses, it will choose what feels good right now over what is meaningful in the long term. That's not necessarily evil, it's just how we're wired. Pleasure in the moment is easier than effort toward the future. But if you always give in to what feels good right now, you become a slave to your impulses, and the cost is devastating. You pay with your health, your relationships, your career, and ultimately your sense of self-respect. So discipline is not about punishment, though many people misunderstand it that way. It's not about living a life devoid of joy or spontaneity. It's about aligning your actions with your highest values, not your lowest cravings. It's about deciding I will not let fleeting emotions dictate the direction of my life. I will choose to act in accordance with what is good for me, what is meaningful for me, even when it's difficult. It's discipline. And the truth is, almost everything you want in life is on the other side of that principle. Consider the difference between motivation and discipline. Motivation is fragile. It comes and goes like the weather. You wake up one morning inspired, ready to take on the world, and by the afternoon you're exhausted, distracted, and back in old habits. If you rely on motivation, your progress will always be inconsistent because you're depending on a feeling. Discipline, by contrast, is not about feeling, it's about principle. It says, I will do what must be done whether I feel like it or not. That's why discipline outlasts motivation. It doesn't bend to moods, and it doesn't require constant emotional fuel. You might think of discipline as a form of self-imposed order. And order in the philosophical sense is what protects you from being consumed by chaos. You could even argue that discipline is the daily ritual of taming chaos in your own life. Take something as simple as waking up on time. The undisciplined self says, stay in bed a little longer, you deserve it. The disciplined self says, no, get up because your time matters and your day is waiting to be shaped. One choice seems trivial, but repeated over months and years, that choice builds a character. A person who rises with discipline builds trust in themselves. A person who gives in repeatedly erodes it. Discipline also ties directly into freedom. That might sound contradictory at first. After all, discipline is about restrictions. But think carefully. If you have no discipline with money, for example, you spend recklessly and soon you're crushed by debt. You're not free at all. You're enslaved to your creditors. If you have no discipline with your body, you indulge in every craving, and eventually you're trapped by poor health. If you discipline yourself to save and invest, you gain financial freedom. If you discipline yourself to exercise and eat well, you gain physical freedom. The paradox is this: the more disciplined you are, the freer you become. Another layer of discipline is emotional control. Life will provoke you: anger, fear, jealousy, resentment. These emotions arise automatically, but whether they govern you is a matter of discipline. If you lash out every time you're angry, you destroy relationships. If you retreat every time you're afraid, you never grow. Discipline doesn't eliminate emotions, but it gives you the capacity to respond rather than react. It's the difference between saying something destructive in the heat of the moment and holding your tongue until you can respond thoughtfully. That's real control, not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. There's also a spiritual or existential dimension to discipline. Every act of discipline is a sacrifice. You give up something small and immediate for something greater in the future. You sacrifice comfort for growth, distraction for focus, indulgence for strength, and sacrifice is meaningful precisely because it acknowledges that your life has potential, that the future can be better if you act now. Discipline is the evidence that you believe in yourself enough to invest in who you could become. But let's not pretend it's easy. Discipline is hard. It requires you to confront resistance. Every single day, it demands that you override the voice in your head that says, not today, maybe tomorrow. It's a battle between your higher self and your lower self, and it never truly ends. But the more you practice discipline, the stronger your higher self becomes. You start to trust yourself, you start to respect yourself, and that respect is crucial, because if you don't respect yourself, you won't believe you're capable of controlling anything at all. The small disciplines matter. Most people often think they need to start with grand gestures, radical transformations, sweeping commitments. But the truth is, self-discipline is built in the tiny decisions repeated consistently. Make your bed. Write down your goals. Show up on time. Keep your promises, especially to yourself. Each small act of discipline is like a brick, and over time, you're building a fortress around your life, something stable, something strong, something that protects you from chaos. Discipline is not about perfection. You will fail, you will give in at times, but the point is not to avoid failure altogether. It is to keep returning to discipline after failure. That's how character is forged. You fall, you get back up, you slip, you correct course. Every time you choose to stand back up, you reinforce the discipline that allows you to move forward. So if you want control, you must master discipline. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Discipline is what transforms responsibility into reality. It is the daily act of choosing order over chaos, meaning over comfort, and growth over stagnation. And remember this, your future self is being shaped by your present discipline. The person you will become in 5 years depends on the choices you make today. So ask yourself, are you building freedom or are you building change? Because in the end, discipline isn't about what you do once. It's about who you become through what you do consistently. Responsibility gives you the foundation. Discipline builds the structure. But neither of these matters if you don't step forward and act. Action is where you can think endlessly about responsibility. You can talk endlessly about discipline, but without translating those principles into concrete movement in the real world, they remain abstractions, and abstractions don't change your life. Action does, the tendency to delay, to overthink, to wait for the perfect moment. That is one of the greatest obstacles to taking control. People imagine that one day conditions will align, opportunities will appear, and only then will they move. But life doesn't work that way. The future is not handed to you. It's created by what you do right now. And this is where people often paralyze themselves. They believe they need certainty before they act, but certainty doesn't come first. Certainty grows from action. You don't become confident and then act, you act, and through action you become confident. Philosophically, this ties back to an ancient truth. Potential is worthless without actuality. You might have talent, intelligence, ambition, but unless you translate those into lived reality through action, they remain potential, and potential can rot just as easily as it can grow. The tragedy is that people live entire lives drowning in unrealized potential, knowing deep down they could have been more, but refusing to pay the price of action. Action in practice is messy. It won't look perfect. You'll make mistakes. You'll face resistance. That is not the reason to avoid it. That is the very process by which you grow. Consider the child learning to walk.
If the child waited until they could walk perfectly, without stumbling, they'd never take the first step. They learn by falling, by failing, by trying again. Adults forget this. We think failure is proof of inadequacy, when in reality it's proof of engagement with the process of growth. Every failure is a piece of evidence that you are acting, and every action is a step closer to mastery. Psychologically, action is also the antidote to fear. Fear grows in stillness. When you sit and dwell on what might happen, on everything that could go wrong, your imagination spirals. You inflate obstacles, magnify risks, and before long you've convinced yourself not to try at all. But the moment you act, fear loses its grip. Your mind shifts from speculation to execution, from imagining to engaging. You realize that most of the things you feared weren't as catastrophic as you thought, and even when challenges do arise, you're stronger than you imagined. Action also creates momentum. Think of it like physics. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion. The hardest part is the beginning, breaking the inertia of inaction. But once you take that first step, no matter how small, the next becomes easier, and then the next, until momentum carries you forward. Too many people are waiting for motivation before they act, when in truth, motivation often follows action, not the other way around. There's a deeper dimension here as well. Action shapes identity. You are not what you intend to do, or what you dream about doing, or even what you say you will do. You are what you repeatedly do. If you act with courage, even in small ways, you become courageous. If you act with consistency, you become consistent. Identity is not built in thought, it is forged in action. That's why every small choice matters, because every choice is a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. But action is not only about yourself, it's also about the world. When you act, you affect reality. You influence other people, you create opportunities, you shift the trajectory of events. Your life is not isolated, it ripples outward, impacting others in ways you can't fully predict or measure. That's why your responsibility and discipline matter so much. When you act responsibly and with discipline, your actions elevate not only your own life, but also the lives of those around you. You become a force for order, for growth, for meaning, not just for yourself, but for your family, your community, perhaps even the world. Now, here's the difficult part. Action requires risk. You can fail, you can be rejected, you can invest effort and not see the reward immediately. And that risk is precisely why people hesitate. They cling to the illusion that inaction is safe. But inaction is the greatest risk of all. If you act, you risk failure. If you do not act, you guarantee regret. And regret is heavier, far heavier than failure. Failure can be corrected, learned from, turned into strength. Regret cannot. Regret is the haunting recognition that you had the chance to act and you chose not to. So you must decide, do you want to live a life marked by the risks of action or the certainty of regret? Because those are the real choices. No one escapes them. And understand this, you do not need to have it all figured out before you begin. You don't need a perfect plan, you need only to start, to move, to test, to adjust. Life is iterative, you refine as you go. The point is not to wait until you have a flawless strategy. The point is to get in motion, because only in motion do new paths open up. Taking control is never about waiting for the right conditions. It is about creating the right conditions through action. You act, you learn, you grow, and in the process, you shape a future that otherwise would never exist. So if you want to take control of your life, don't just carry responsibility. Don't just practice discipline, step forward and act. Act when it's hard, act when it's uncertain, act when you don't feel ready, because readiness doesn't precede action, it follows it. And if you're still hesitating, let me leave you with this. Every day you delay is a day you cannot get back. Time is moving whether you act or not. The question is whether you will let it carry you passively, or whether you will use it actively to create the life you want. The choice is yours, but remember this: your future is being written either way. So take the pen and write it with action.